Well, shit. Oh, there we are. Better check. Better check the sound. See how the sound is. How we doing with sound? Hello, sound. Hello, sound. Yay, we have sound. Yippee. Okay. So we got a couple of people here. I just had a really just about his wife's employer, Pat Robertson. My sister-in-law is the director of marketing for Christian Broadcast Network. And Robertson's been saying some really awful things about queers lately, queer kids in particular. And he's advising parents to be beating their kids queer kids straight. I was just reading the well, let's go back and see what my brother just totally bugged out. Yeah, and he's like totally oblivious, and all these Christians are totally oblivious to everything that Judeo-Christian imperialist colonialism has done to the world over the last. They've kept the world at war. They've altered about 3/4 of the planet's surface, killed off 2/3 of the animals, 3/4 of the animals, and 2/3 of the plants. Hundreds and hundreds of native nations all over the world. And now they're coming for the transgender people here in America and everywhere else. There was a Christian missionary group involved in the death penalty laws in Kenya and Uganda. Lobbyists, Christian lobbying groups, trying to do it here. The Southern Baptist 2014 resolution on transgender identity is resolved to oppose it, to oppose everything about anything about transgender people, to they oppose efforts to alter one's bodily identity, steadfastly any efforts and all efforts to validate transgender identity as morally praiseworthy, and be it further that we oppose all cultural efforts to validate claims to transgender identity, and finally that our love for the gospel and the urgency for the Great Commission must include declaring the whole counsel of God, proclaiming what Scripture teaches about God's design for us as male and female persons, created in His image and for His glory. Hallelujah. This is like the Baptist Convention, Southern Baptist Convention. Where's that other one? Let's get rid of that. That's just disgusting. How about focus on the family? Saying the same shit. God's design for two sexes, male and female, and marriage between one man and one woman. Disagree with revisionist gay and transgender theologies as contradictory to foundational Christian doctrine and the Judeo-Christian ethic. Well, and a lot of Christians. There are 33,000 Christian sects, over 33,000. And they sure don't agree with each other. Never did. That's why you got the Anglican Church in the first place. It broke off from the Vatican. Okay, let's close some of this shit up. Why isn't a rape allegation worth an impeachment inquiry? Because that's just too obvious. And then there's fraud, he defrauded all those university students, the Trump university students. I'm like, what kind of president is that? But anyway, I digress. There was, no, I don't want to go into that. Let's get rid of that. Coconut shrimp and chickpea curry. That's what I'm making for the potluck Thursday. I'll just put it away. Nobody's there. Anyway, moving right along. Here's Jay Michelson responding to Eric Tetzel, the head of the Kansas chapter of the Family Policy Alliance, political arm of the Christian right, being the focus on the family. They got one of their little things through the Kansas Republican Party in February 18th of 2018, passed an unusual anti-transgender resolution that is more theology than politics, proposed by Eric Tetzel, head of the Kansas chapter of the Family Policy Alliance, as part of a national strategy to delegitimize transgender people and the concept of transgender itself, all on religious grounds. There are no other grounds. And what happened to religious freedom? Well, I have the freedom to not follow your religion. You do not have the freedom to impose your religion on me. So this is where we are parting company with the American way. Those then are the terms on which I, as a rabbi, will engage it, because as a theological document, it's profoundly flawed. God's design was the creation of two distinct and complementary sexes, male and female, the resolution states. Nevertheless, many have sought to normalize transgenderism, which is not an accepted term in the medical field anymore, and define gender according to one's self-perception apart from biological anatomy. After listing some of the ways in which society has done so, the resolution says these cultural currents run counter to God's created order and violate the dignity of every human being. Well, I can only speak from my own experience, and I had to consciously suppress feminine movement, posturing, speech to pass as a male. This is not self-perception. This is what I am. But never mind me. I'm just me. For that reason, it concludes, we affirm God's design for gender as determined by biological sex and not by self-perception. We oppose all efforts to validate transgender identity and so on. Let's focus on two important errors in that text. First, yes, in the Genesis story, God creates human beings of male and female sex, but the creation story says nothing about gender. Notice how the end of, remember, sex is not the same as gender. Definitionally, sex is about chromosomes. Gender is about cultural practices. Sex is what is between our legs, and gender is what is between our ears. My male sex means I can grow a beard. My male gender means it's socially acceptable for me to do so, but not in conservative societies to wear high heels and makeup. Of course, there's nothing objectively male or female about shoes and clothes. They are aspects of gender, and they are socially constructed. Now, just because the Genesis story is silent about gender doesn't mean the Bible is. In fact, the Bible presents clear gender roles as aligned with sex, in which women are subordinate to men. Wives, submit to your husbands as you do the Lord. That's some of that Paulist stuff. Man, Ephesians. Men purchase and own their multiple wives, and they forcibly marry the widows of enemies they kill, and they hold concubines as additional sexual partners in addition to their wives. Is this what Tetzel means about God's design for gender? Even if it is, what about those men and women who deviate from the gender roles in the Bible? The patriarch Jacob, for example, is clearly gendered female in comparison with his twin brother Esau. Esau is hairy, Jacob is smooth. Esau is a hunter, Jacob stays in the tent, which is where the women stay and cooks. Esau is favored by his father, Jacob by his mom, and yet Jacob is the chosen one who becomes Israel, who fathers a nation. Of course, Jacob didn't go on hormone therapy, but the way the Bible constructs his gender identity makes it very clear that at least until his transformative nighttime wrestling match, he is gender nonconforming. Likewise, Deborah the judge who performed a male societal role. Likewise, the beautiful young David in his armor carrier relationships with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, the Apostle Paul, who rebelled against the fundamental gender role of his time, fathering children by becoming celibate. Likewise, the pairs of female emissaries in the New Testament, Tryphena and Tryphosa in Romans 16:12, and Yehodia and Syntyche in Philippians 4:1, who preach the gospel in ways usually reserved for men. On and on and on, the Bible presents heroic characters who vary from normative gender roles. If the Bible is our guide, then God's design for gender is a gigantic rainbow of variation, not a black and white conformity with sex. Second, the resolution argues that to normalize transgender would violate the dignity of every human being. In fact, the opposite is true. Societally, we recognize and affirm the dignity of every human being when we respect their profound sense of self-understanding, echoed by science, culture, and history. Really, there are only two options when it comes to transgender people. One is to listen to what they have to say, and the other is to decide that they are so deeply mentally ill that they cannot be trusted to describe their own experiences. The trouble is, the latter is simply incompatible with actually knowing anyone trans, or even watching someone trans speak in the media. It's kind of willful blindness, coupled with an outrageous dehumanization. After all, it's not just one or two people, it's hundreds of thousands of people articulately describing their experiences. Moreover, the overwhelming consensus of scientists agrees with what trans people themselves say. When trans people are able to live as themselves, they are measurably, objectively happier, healthier, and safer. So to hold to some kind of trans invalidating position is so counterfactual, counter-moral, and counter-scientific that it begs the question of whether it's a position at all or is in fact a fear or prejudice. It certainly isn't respecting the human dignity of trans people. Here's an alternative religious explanation. If we are to believe in God's design, we must look at what God has designed. In biblical texts, most of life, sex is indeed male and female. And for the vast majority of people, sex and gender align. I am biologically male, was assigned male at birth, identify as male, and mostly present as masculine. For roughly 0.6% of the people, however, gender, and if you guys pull this out, and I'll sue the fuck out of you for that. Oh boy, will I sue the fuck out of you for that. I am biologically male, was assigned male as birth, but identify as female and present as female. I recognize that I got testicles, but that's the only part of me that's male. For roughly 0.6% of the people, however, gender and sex do not align. Just as I know myself to be a man, transgender people know, and medical professionals confirm, that their gender does not match their sex or the gender they were assigned at birth. In the past, trans people, though not known as such, had a wide variety of social roles. In the West, most likely suffered through their gender dysphoria, or identified as gay or lesbian, or worked as cross-dressers or performers or sex workers living on the margins of society. Others may have expressed their gender in other ways by being tomboys or sissies or male florists or female soldiers, for example. Some lived according to their gender, hiding their anatomical sex their entire lives. A few fortunate ones, such as Queen Christina of Sweden, were able to live lives that look recognizably transgender today. In some other cultures, the situation was different. In India, for example, Hijra are male-bodied people who dress as women, do not marry, and have defined and often stigmatized social roles, particularly in life cycle events. There are extensive records of African and Native American cultural roles held by third-gender persons who often cross-dressed, held spiritual leadership roles, and were regarded as rare special beings. This is God's plan, then, a spectrum of gender. So what do we do about it? Clearly, we must support trans people to choose life. This is the commandment. This is, Deuteronomy 30 as kind of a summary of the whole of the Torah there, just reminding that it's the people, that it's a blessing and a curse, that we need to love everybody, everything, everyone, and within range of our senses, unconditionally. And to refuse to recognize the validity of transgender people is just not love. Today, as transgender people have demanded their rights and recognition, and as medical science has evolved, a wide variety of options are available. Some opt for hormone therapy or gender confirmation surgery of different types. Others do not pursue medical intervention, but present, dress, speak, act according to their gender identity. Still others find themselves somewhere in between the categories our society promotes and identify as genderqueer or somewhere along a non-binary gender spectrum. For those of us who are not trans, we are called to listen rather than dictate. We are called to open ourselves to the truth, not to our opinions. Love, after all, rejoices with the truth. That's 1 Corinthians 13. Remember, being transgender isn't simply a feeling or a preference. It's a profound, often difficult process of self-understanding. A trans woman understands herself to be female just as much as I understand myself to be male. Usually, such self-understanding takes place together with mental health professionals, counselors, and doctors. It is a moral journey. Neither the pain of gender dysphoria nor the joy of living authentically is one of one's true self or trivial matters. They're profoundly moral, religious ones. On the one hand, if God loves human beings, then God cannot abide the pain of gender dysphoria. It is not real love to allow such harm to take place because love does no harm to its neighbor. And I cannot stand by while a society stigmatizes transgender people, causes them suffering, or creates a world in which transgender women, particularly women of color, continue to be assaulted and even murdered at shocking rates. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. My sisters, about half of the people killed, the transgender people killed in America in the last years, several years, about half have been killed by their significant other, someone they knew, someone they had a relationship with. These are not random attacks. These are people that transgender people have trusted in their lives that turned on them and killed them. Whereas when I see my transgender friends living their lives as pastors, rabbis, artists, politicians, colleagues, performers, dads, moms, and ordinary human beings, and yes, I know trans folks who are all of these, I see the wondrous diversity of God's many gendered faces. This diversity, not some oppressive and artificial monoculture, is how God, nature, and humanity flourish. Truly, the fruit of the Spirit is joy. Open your eyes, Eric Tietzel. Numbers 22:31. The truth will set you free. John 8:32. God has far more expansive designs for gender than you seem able yet to acknowledge. So come learn the truth. Come meet some trans people, talk to them, or better yet, listen to them with your ears open. Well, from what I understand, the Secretary of State of Texas, or it's not a governor, so I forget exactly what the story is there. He had dinner with a transgender kid and her family, and then went and backed some bill that was harmful to them. Well, not much chit chat tonight. See what else is worth reading here. There's another one. Here's a transgender person writing about the common ways Christians stereotype transgender people. A transgender person, one of the biggest myths, this is by Austin Hartke from February 26, 2018. As a transgender person, one of the biggest myths I see in the media today is that transgender people live sad, dangerous, and lonely lives. We're often defined by our gender dysphoria, and stories about us, especially in Christian circles, are all about how we came out to, and in most cases are rejected by our families and churches. While we do face discrimination and rejection, many of us are moving toward joy and community in other ways. So many of us love who we are and wouldn't trade it for the world. That's when gender dysphoria becomes gender euphoria. You know, the clinical studies are showing it pretty clearly. Um, there's less than a 3% uh, dissatisfaction rate with surgeries, and those are almost always due to botch job or outside pressures. It's not because somebody decided they weren't transgender anymore. Walt Heyer was never transgender in the first place, and he's like the big star of the hey. These people aren't all going to do that, and blah 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 blah. And 80% of them desist, and yada yada yada. Well, that's not what happens. Misconception. Well, this is a response to someone named Nancy Pearcey. Let's see what this shit is. In Christianity Today, how transgender narrative perpetuates stereotypes. No, I can't deal with that. I really can't deal with any of this. I don't understand what motivates haters. I always feel real bad when I'm hating on something. It makes me feel good to hate something. Never did. Yeah, you know what? I'm bored. Yeah, and not getting no conversation. Hardly anybody showing up. So I'm out of here. Happy day. Thanks for watching. Bye.